Today is Shabbat. Well, the Sabbath, right? This video, you clicked on it because it said something along the lines of a Gentile practices Shabbat, or a Gentile's view of the Sabbath. And sort of the conversation I want to have. You see, over the last few months, I've had the opportunity to spend an extended amount of time with a close friend of mine and his family. And he's a Orthodox Jew. And so I've been able to visit over the weekends and spend time experiencing and diving into a world and culture that I really knew very little about. Growing up in the church, I had experience with the Sabbath. I understood the Old Testament and the stories, and had the language to at least bridge that knowledge gap. But the idea of Shabbat, the application of it on Saturday as opposed to Sunday, and the way that his community, or at least his family, expresses and practices, I found really interesting, really compelling, and so I thought I'd do a video talking about it. So today is Shabbat, Saturday for us, and all around the country, all around the world, there are varying levels of practicing Orthodox Jews and other degrees. I know there's Reformed and a whole mix, and I'm not sure actually the degree to which they practice or keep the Sabbath holy, but I do know in his community there are, a lot of practicing Orthodox Jews who, from Friday evening at sunset for 25 hours all the way to Saturday night, disconnect from technology, disconnect from using electricity. They don't start anything when it comes to cooking or turning on lights. They actually have automated systems that, well, nowadays, in modern time, make it more convenient to sort of exist during the evenings. But yeah, there's a whole community of people who disconnect for a day, to have meals together, to spend time together, to share, and in our case, play board games. But really to separate, to study, to learn, to dwell on things that are more spiritually inclined, to read and listen and invest in the people that are around them, to come together as a community. And I've had a chance to spend time with that. I think I've been up there 3, maybe 4 times now. So 3 or 4 Saturdays disconnected from everything, just spending time being with and being around the people that you're around, being around the people that you care about. So let's start with my own context, right? Because again, this is a little bit of an interesting video. This is my view and my impressions of things so far. And this is one family in one community of a wider, large and historic religion. And so this in no way represents Orthodox Judaism or kind of the Jewish faith altogether. This is, again, just one Gentile's view of it. And I say Gentile as a humorous and appropriate terminology, certainly not insulting, or I don't take offense to that terminology at all. I find it charming. And they don't, I should probably clarify, they also don't actively go around calling me the Gentile. So, my experience with the Sabbath, I always grew up with my grandparents talking about it, emphasizing and encouraging us to, keep the Sabbath holy, right? It's one of the 10 Commandments. It's one of the things that we're supposed to do. And our practice of it was they didn't like me to schedule work, actual jobs, like work at a Panera, for instance, when I was younger. They frowned upon working on Sunday. They thought Sunday was a day to go to church, to spend time in communion with people, to have a large family meal in mid-afternoon, and then spend the rest of the day reading or relaxing or watching the birds or doing a little bit of gardening if the need came up, but only what you enjoyed, only what you were able to do in celebration and do in process. It wasn't to the same degree that sort of the Orthodox community does keep the Sabbath holy. There certainly weren't laws or restrictions around it, more guidelines and suggestions, and a gentle, consistent nudge from my grandparents, encouraging me to focus and remember things that are important. Remember that we as humans need a day of rest, and that God has set aside this day just like He needed a day of rest. On the 7th day of creation, He set aside a day for us. In Christianity, in the churches that I grew up, that was Sunday. That was when we went to church. That was the beginning of the new week, or the end of the old week, I suppose. And for the Orthodox community, that's going to be Saturday, which is interesting because it creates even more of a conflict, in a way. Sundays being free is not as detrimental to your social life as Saturdays being closed, which I have enjoyed because going to spend time with them is part of my social life. But my entire career, it's a fascinating concept. I wouldn't be able to be a wedding or event photographer if I was practicing Orthodox Judaism, because all the events that I shoot, at least in my current career, weddings and events in the secular modern world, happen on Saturdays. I suppose I could be a effective bar mitzvah photographer, which I know, and I have some friends who are and who have done those. But yeah, I would have to cover in-community events or weekday events or Sunday events, as opposed to Saturday being the main source of income that I've had. Along with that, we, of course, didn't restrict driving or transportation. We didn't turn off all the lights and turn them all back on. There wasn't the same degree of ritual that was practiced in the Sabbath for us. For us, it was a day of prayer, and we'd pray before meals and come together at the table as a family. But in the Jewish community, in the family that I'm with, there is certainly a degree of keeping the Sabbath holy and ushering in the idea of a sanctuary or a temple that kind of all the Jewish community is venturing into together, right, on the Sabbath. You're sort of building this holy space around yourself, and everyone is thought to be in communion there with everyone else. That's part of the Jewish faith. That's part of the community. So, taking my experience with the Sabbath and applying it over to Shabbat. Shabbat's on Saturday. Shabbat is a 25-hour period. Shabbat required me to, well, it didn't require me, but I chose to take part in it, right? And so it required me to turn off my phone, turn off technology, turn off the stuff that's usually drawing my attention from day to day, and focus on people and community and those that are around me. My first impression with that, I knew it would be a bit of a challenge, and it wasn't actually that difficult. It would have been much harder if I was on my own, but having a community of people around me that were doing it with me really lessened the burden that would be. It allowed us to spend time together and focus on each other and relax and sleep a little bit and play a lot of games around the table and eat a lot of delicious food. But the week leading up to Shabbat, the degree to which I know I'm turning off technology in an hour, and the hustle and bustle in the family's house as they adjusted and adapted and made sure that food was ready and lights were prepared and everything was in place so that they could dedicate this time to each other and dedicate this time to God, I actually think is really nice. I really think that, my grandparents had it right. The Orthodox community has it right when it comes to us needing a day of rest, us needing more than ever an opportunity to separate, to focus on those that are immediately around you, to relax and not have to worry and stress about the career, because you can't answer emails. You can't edit videos. You can't call your boss. You can't be called into work last second, well, unless you're in the medical field. That still is, there's a bit of exception there. But I think there's something to this, something to the concept of keeping the Sabbath holy like my grandparents did, or practicing the ritual and the confinement of Shabbat. Telling yourself and knowing that you're approaching every single week, approaching the end of the week where you're going to be forced to recuperate and you're going to be forced to pull back. So you do more. You use your time more wisely. You helter and skelter that last day and those last hours leading up to it, knocking out the final few messages that you need to get so that you're not worried about them, so they don't dwell on your mind over the weekend. And then when the time comes and the sun has set and your technology is off, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, they have a hard restriction on a lot of different things that I'm not aware of, but for the most part it comes down to don't use electricity. Don't engage with something that causes it to turn on or off. Don't press buttons. Don't, open doors, like elevator doors. And you're not allowed to do things that are classified as work. You can do things that aren't. Spiritual things, learning things, family things. But everything else is on hold for 25 hours. Shabbat usually starts with the lighting of a series of candles, which I honestly don't fully understand what they are yet. I need to do more research on those. And then a reading of scripture or prayer in Hebrew, I believe. I think that's what they're speaking. I, of course, don't know or understand the words yet. I believe in most Orthodox Jewish communities, the children grow up or the converts have to take the time to actually learn the language so they can understand and translate and read Scripture in its original text. For me, I did some research and spend the time dwelling on the fact that we are welcoming in the temple. We are entering into a holy space, a space that is set aside for God and protected for your family, a space that everyone practicing, everyone following is now stepping into the same environment, experiencing the same communal day of rest. And I find that fascinating. I find that really beautiful in a way. This community that's all coming together. I mean, it's similar, I suppose, to walking through the church doors, but growing up in the Protestant faith, there's so many division, there's so much division that you worshiping in a Methodist church and Catholics worshiping in a Catholic church, you don't really feel like you're communing as one together. There's not a sense of a whole or a unified group. The interesting thing that I've also learned about the Jewish community is you don't pray as an individual either. At least that's what I've been told from online sources. You pray in a plural. You pray as a plurality. You pray as the community. And so there's this interesting divide between the individual, which I grew up with a strong sense of that in the Christian faith, and the communal, which I think was less so in my Christian upbringing, but very heavily emphasized in the Jewish communities that I've been a part of. And then you go through a ritual of pouring wine, blessing wine, pouring wine, and then breaking bread, which is very similar because Christ himself, Jesus broke bread and drank wine and shared that with his disciples, and he was keeping the Sabbath. He was a Jewish man, and, this is very similar to the practice that has been kept for thousands of years by this community. The bread, I think it's challah, is absolutely delicious. Might not be, but I think that's the term for it. And the wine is always good. It doesn't... My phone's ringing there. The bread, which I believe is challah, correct me if I'm wrong here, is sort of like a sweet loaf, which was absolutely delicious. Over Passover, it was a thin wafer. I forget the term for it, but it was unleavened bread, flour and water really that had been baked, and it was actually fairly good as well. And then there's a ton of delicious food, and I cannot speak highly enough of the family that I'm with because I would continue going back. I will continue going back as much as possible just for how incredible the cooking is. But all of it's different from what I would normally eat. All of it follows the strict kosher rules, which has restrictions on the type of food you can eat, and things like, hoofed animals and non-hoofed animals, or fish that have a certain degree of scales, I believe. Like you can't eat lobster, or shellfish. And those are all going to be based off of the laws that were given in the Torah, I believe, to the people. 600 and something of them, whereas us Gentiles only have 10, which is also interesting. So, takeaway, final thoughts. What can you learn for Shabbat? Well, if you're a Christian or not a Christian, if you're a Gentile, if you're a Jew, if you're any practicing faith, I think the biggest takeaway that I've had is that my grandparents were right, or the Jewish community has been right, or the Christian community, let's boil it down to the essence of it, right? There's something in Scripture that is right. Keep the Sabbath holy. Have a day of rest. Separate and focus and invest in those around you. Today's Shabbat, and I'm going to be working today. And I'm okay with that. I enjoy what I do. I love being a photographer. I love capturing and telling stories at weddings, but There's a degree to which you sort of feel like you're missing out on something now if you're not keeping it. That opportunity to recharge, the chance to step away and be with and commune with a community of people. It's really nice. And that would be my takeaway. Whether it's on Saturday or Sunday specifically, or you schedule it in a different form, find a way to separate, to focus on your family and those around you, whether it's for an hour to begin or half the day, or whether it's turning off your phone on Sundays when you go to church and then go out to dinner and just not being distracted and disconnected until you get home. Whether it's doing something purposeful like going to a park, going for a walk, and not bringing that added technology, or whether it is actively engaging with or continuing to engage with your faith. I mean, in the Orthodox community, if anyone who is Jewish is watching this, you have something special in the traditions that you've passed down. Something that I think the rest of the world can learn from and should learn from. Something that I think Christians should practice more thoroughly and more accurately. It's not just, and it doesn't have to be just something about faith in God or communing with Him. Although if you do believe, then I think there's a special separation that's made there. But even if it's just about your family, even if it's just about your health and your stress and the degree to which you care and invest in those around you, you're instructed to do so. Ordered. You have no option, right? It's a law. If you don't do it, you're breaking a rule. And I don't know that I like rules, but it's one that's designed for you. And that's curious. Throughout human history, we have maintained and continued to learn and been told by either God or men that have learned before us that having a day of rest is needed and that it's important. So, I guess my takeaway from Shabbat as a Gentile experiencing it for the first time this last year is don't take it for granted. Don't take tradition or rules or laws or teachings for granted. Because there is something missing to those of us that don't have it. Or at least don't practice it. I should have listened to my grandparents more than I have. I don't know if it's every Saturday, and there's a question of my career. But there's a lot of value there. And I'm grateful that I have had the opportunity to spend this time with my friends. But I'm looking forward to the next one. Because even if it's only once a month at this point, I think it's good to take a break. To keep the Sabbath holy. To keep Shabbat.